You meet a fellow movie lover at a party, and quickly strike up conversation about your favorite films and movie stars. Eventually, the topic of Jack Nicholson comes up, and you express how tough it is to pick a favorite Jack performance, with such amazing contenders as Chinatown, The Shining, and Batman in the mix. Your new buddy agrees, but admits their favorite might just be Nicholson's Academy Award-winning turn in James L. Brooks' 1997 romantic comedy about a novelist afflicted with severe OCD. "Ah, yes, as good as it gets," you respond, and are greeted with a quizzical look. "No, that's not it," says your fellow Jack lover. "I'm talking about Mr. Cat Poop." Now, before you assume your conversation partner is being sarcastic or pulling a prank on you, it's important to find out if they are from, or were at least living in, Hong Kong in 1997, because Mr. Cat Poop actually was the title used for As Good as It Gets in that particular market. Yes, it's just one example of a long-running cinematic tradition, films being retitled in various international territories. Often, movie titles require changing in different countries because the local languages have no literal translation for certain phrases or idioms. In many cases, the movies instead end up with very unique titles, reached as questionable translations of their premise. Which is why, in China, Risky Business became Just Send Him to University Unqualified. Pretty Woman became I Will Marry a Prostitute to Save Money. And Free Willy became A Very Powerful Whale Runs to Heaven. Sometimes, names are changed because of concerns about the cultural knowledge or opinions of a title, which might explain why, in Germany, the Captain America trilogy was released as The First Avenger, The Return of the First Avenger, and First Avenger Civil War, and why Live Free or Die Hard was released under its originally planned title, Die Hard 4.0, in most European markets, as distributors there worried audiences might not be as taken with a title based on the New Hampshire state motto. Somewhat similarly, though perhaps not as patriotically minded, Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle was retitled Harold and Kumar Get the Munchies in many countries that had never heard of the titular iconic American fast food chain. But sometimes it's hard to guess at the specific motivation of a title change, but still easy to be amused by it. Is there a logical reason for Denmark renaming Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory as The Boy Drowned in the Chocolate Sauce? Maybe not, but I'd still definitely want to watch that movie. Likewise, I can only guess at the specific reasons for why France changed Home Alone to Mom, I Missed the Plane, and Thailand changed The Waterboy to Dimwit Surges Forth, but in both cases I have to admit the new titles do still get the point across on a certain level. And even if you believe a film's original title is quite simple and easy to translate across all languages and cultures, that doesn't necessarily mean other countries will agree with you. Or maybe, in fact, the very simplicity of the title is what they will disagree with, and choose to instead go with a new name they feel is more indicative of the movie's spirit. This could explain why the classic American comedy Airplane was called Flying High in New Zealand, Is There a Pilot on the Plane in France, and The Incredible Journey in a Crazy Plane in Italy. And the practice of international title changes does not only occur in markets with different languages. For various reasons, certain movies have had different titles in the US and the UK. Over the years, the UK has renamed Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles over the BBC's concerns about kids playing ninja, changed Hoosiers to Best Shot over worries that UK residents wouldn't be familiar with the colloquial term for Indiana residents, and changed the Seth Rogen-Zac Efron Neighbours movies to Bad Neighbours, to avoid confusion with an Australian soap opera called Neighbours that was particularly popular in the UK. Not even one of the biggest movies in the world could avoid this sort of consideration, as in 2012, Marvel Studios was forced to retitle their upcoming giant crossover film, adding the word assemble. So while American audiences would have to wait 7 more years to hear Captain America finally utter the iconic catchphrase, Avengers Assemble, UK audiences got it as the title of the very first Avengers movie. And why was that? Well, because as big as the MCU and the first Avengers movie were clearly set to be, the UK still wanted to make sure no one confused it with a popular BBC adventure series from the 60s, and perhaps, even more importantly, a 90s movie adaptation that probably no wannabe blockbuster would ever want to be compared to. The year is 1998, and Warner Brothers are ready to unleash the big screen adaptation of the aforementioned cult classic 60s BBC series, and in the process hopefully launch the next big spy action comedy franchise with The Avengers.
0.
Welcome once again to Failure to Franchise, the show dedicated to some of Hollywood's most infamous mistakes, missteps, and misfires. This is Trev.
Ba 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 ba. And I'm Chris, here to assemble.
Okay.
I said bear with me.
Yeah, I don't know. It was worth it. It was all worth it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
There was an idea. I wish I knew the whole spiel. We're here to talk to you about the Avengers initiative, but not the initiative you're thinking of. Instead, the initiative to make a failed movie. So, this is Chris. It's our favorite time. We're kicking off a new theme.
This one's gonna last longer than months, or 1 month, by the way. So
this one's
it's more than 2 movies.
This one's got some heft to it. We are kicking off our summer sweeps, which is a theme, like as Chris said, a few months dedicated to movies based on TV shows, which was quite the rage for a while there, and I guess never really goes away. But we're gonna see how, especially for a while, Hollywood was all about this for a while there, of dusting off old TV shows that had hung around in the ether, in the pop culture, mindset, and saying, you know what, people used to like this in weekly installments. Maybe they'll like it if we pump way more money into it and put it out in theaters for one weekend. and sometimes it worked, and as this series will show, sometimes it didn't.
Yeah.
So we're kicking off with the interestingly titled, at least for some of the world, as we've been alluding to, the 1998 film The Avengers. Not Marvel's The Avengers, although this is the movie that made Marvel change the name of that film when they released it over in the UK. We'll get into that. But no, this is 1998's The Avengers. Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about this one before we discuss the show it's based on?
For sure. First of all, I'm looking forward to the copyright strike we'll get with me humming that theme. It was.
Oh, don't worry, you didn't
so
do
good.
a good enough. You didn't do a good enough job. Don't worry.
Oh, great, thanks. Anyway, okay. So, 1998's The Avengers is directed by Jeremiah S. Chechik. Funnily enough, he went straight to directorial jail after this and directed TV for about 15 years after, which is pretty ironic because he was trying to bring a TV show to theaters.
But don't bury the lead on this guy on what he did before this, because if you're making a big budget Hollywood action movie, you do say, "Get me the man who directed National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation."
Yes. which we will say, as we discussed in our Vacation 2015 episode, Christmas Vacation is both of our favorites of the Vacation franchise.
Oh yeah, one of my favorite Christmas movies. Period.
Yeah. So definitely get this guy.
I guess we're both Chechik heads and didn't even realize it.
For sure. Well, which Chechik, who's famous for the internet or whatnot? For you or me to decide. I don't know.
I don't know what you're talking about, Chris.
Yeah, okay. All right. Delete clear history. Okay. This is written by Don McPherson. Is based on the 1960s TV show created by Canadian Sidney Newman, who went on to actually create Doctor Who, which, Trev, I'm sure we'll talk about. You have a pretty long history with that property. You were there when he incepted the idea to you, and you were like, yeah, you should go for it. That was your first Canadian friend was Sidney Newman.
The whole reason they decided to make a show about a time traveler was I was just telling them about my childhood back in the 1800s, and they were like, oh yeah, we might be exciting to go back and visit that. So.
How long do you think we're going to keep that stupid bit going?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Well, probably not long because I'll probably die soon, so in my old age. So.
I was going to say, by the time I get to your age, it'll be over. Okay. The budget of The Avengers, $60 million. Domestically, it made $23 million, and worldwide, around $50 million. It wasn't really certain on this one. It seems like a movie that they tried to bury the details on. So about $50 million worldwide, which that's just a huge bomb.
Yeah.
Why would it be a bomb, Trev? Because The Avengers from the 60s was this gigantic show, supposedly. It did run for a long time. We'll talk about the history of it right now, but also, do you know a living soul who's ever talked to you about this show in any way, shape, or form? Because I'll tell you, I do not.
Well, okay, let's be fair here, because when you say, before we get too sarcastic about it, we can still answer the question you posed with like giving the show its due, because you said like why was this like a bomb? The show was such a hit. I mean, that is true, but we have to remember that we're only talking about half the world. The show was a huge hit in the UK. And then for a while, it was a pretty big deal in the U.S. as well. But yeah, it's not like, unlike something like Doctor Who, which, honestly, it's probably somewhat comparable simply because Doctor Who even went away for like a long time and was like kind of, obviously revitalized in the 2000s. But even when I was growing up as a kid, again, it was super, super long ago, but when I was a kid, there were still like reruns of Doctor Who that would show on American TV. Mm-hmm. This one didn't really seem like, even though we'll talk about it, it had a brief heyday in America as well, but it didn't hold on the same way, I think, after it went off the air. So I think its like legacy is pretty much, except for like a cult following here in the US and Canada, I think it has like more of its legacy is more, relegated to the UK.
Sure.
So if you're releasing a movie that needs to be a hit in every country with this show, you might have a problem because it's not a property that was the same gigantic pop culture sensation around the world as it was in just its home country of the UK.
Big time in the UK. I mean, this thing ran from 1961 to 1969 for 161 episodes. So pretty long. There's quite a bit of episodes there. I had no idea this ran for so long. And Trev, I know you just recently watched, for the podcast, you did the work. I always say that. As much as I want to make fun of things, you did the work. And you
watched all 161 episodes. No, I watched an episode. I'll talk about it a little later. I don't want to talk about what I thought of the episode until we talk about the movie.
Sure.
But I did want to do some homework on it because, I mean, okay, to go back and answer a question you asked, you asked, do I remember anyone ever talking to me about this show? Or, I mean, obviously not really, but I did have somewhat of an awareness of the show even before this movie came out. Primarily because I do remember when they released a comic book of it in the early 90s, written by Grant Morrison. But I remember at the time that's where I think I learned about the show and being kind of confused because the comic book was called Steed and Mrs. Peel. But then, you'd see like the trade ads for it or see the book and it's like based on the Avengers. And of course, me as a, ignorant American, I'm like, the Avengers? You mean Captain America and Thor and Iron Man? And so just already getting confused, like, wait, okay, so there's this comic book called Steed and Mrs. Peel, but it's based on a show called The Avengers. Like, what's going on here, right? Mm-hmm. And that's when I started to learn about it. But obviously, for the purposes of this podcast, I wanted to learn a little bit more about the show. And I think it's worth talking about the show because the history of the series, The Avengers, is actually kind of fascinating and speaks to like just a very different era in TV. And primarily, and I'm sure you saw a little bit too about the development of the show, it's like the ultimate example of what can happen with the show when you actually allow it to run for a while and not just cancel it after one season. So streaming services maybe take notice to, how a show can build an audience, but also find itself. So as you said, this is a show that starts in 61, called The Avengers, but in a somewhat quite different form than what it ultimately becomes. It was actually created to be like a star vehicle for an actor named Ian Hendry, who had just recently appeared in a show called Police Surgeon, which is like that seems so funny to me. That seems like a 30 Rock joke or something,
Totally.
Like Tracy Jordan in Police Surgeon. But they tried that show. It didn't really work, but the network liked Ian Hendry. BBC was like, we want to be in the Ian Hendry business, so let's make him a new show. And they created this show called The Avengers, and he played a character named David Keel, who was supposed to be the main character. And the whole thing was in the pilot, he finds out that his assistant has been murdered, and he wants to try and figure out who. And suddenly, this man appears named John Steed, played by Patrick Macnee. And it's a mysterious character who you don't really know like what his motivations are and who he works for or where he's coming from. But he appears to David Keel and says, I'll help you figure out who solved the murder of your assistant because there are other people being murdered and I think it's linked. And so the two of them go off on this adventure. They solve the case and then they decide to keep working together. But John Steed was very much the sidekick. Now, Chris, I don't know how much you saw this, but what's interesting about this is we know this is the plot of the first season only because we still have access to the scripts and some audio because like many British shows, you brought up Doctor Who before, and this is like a problem with early Doctor Who seasons as well. Back in the 60s, the BBC, like their master tapes for a lot of their shows were just on video. And
Right.
because reruns weren't a thing at the time, and because they had no thought of future home video or home video releases or physical releases, they would actually tape over those videos later on with other shows. So most of the entire first season of the Avengers has been lost to time, except for 3 episodes. But even there's 3 episodes left, and I think like the first 10 minutes of the first episode or something, which John Steed's not even in. But yeah, so that's what the show is. It is crazy, right? To think that TV, people talk about like the disposability of TV nowadays and like things with like Warner Brothers just canceling movies. But man, back then they weren't even thinking about saving these things. Now we have this iconic show that we'll just never get to see the first season of. But I guess that's maybe okay because, as I said, it changes a lot after the first season.
Definitely.
Because Ian Hendry decides to quit. He doesn't want to do the show anymore. And they're thinking, oh no, what do we do?
And they're like, we're going to tape over all your tapes.
maybe that was vindictive.
spite.
Maybe that's why they did.
Yeah.
So they decide to bring it back for a second season, but without Ian Hendry, they elevate Patrick Macnee's character of John Steed to the main character, and they decide to start giving him like sidekicks to work with. And in the second season, I think maybe even to the third, it's kind of like a rotating cast of sidekicks that he's given. He's given like different people to work on the cases with him.
Extraordinary crimes against the people and the state have to be avenged by agents extraordinary. 2 such people are John Steed, top professional, and his partner, Emma Peel, talented amateur.
And also, his character starts to change. Based on what we know of the first season, he's always just kind of this like mysterious hero. Like I said, not much is known about him, but he like wears a trench coat. He's played more, I think, as like kind of a standard traditional PI character. And as the show goes on, they start to like change him into where he starts to become more of like a proper British gentleman character, to the point where he ultimately ends up in this very iconic costume of always wearing a bowler hat and carrying an umbrella. Very much like, for modern audiences, I think of like this spirit of the Kingsman movies.
Totally.
Which I guarantee you have to be like heavily inspired by the Avengers.
Which is funny because Ralph Fiennes goes on to be in those movies.
Yes.
So
Yes,
that
I thought
franchise.
that too. Yeah. Do you think he had any, like, when they contacted him for that movie and they were like, yeah, you're going to be a Kingsman, you're going to carry this umbrella and wear this hat? He's like, oh, shit. He's like, oh, no, I've been down that road before.
Or he's like, a lot of stuff is going on with J.K. Rowling right now, and I have to distance myself from Harry Potter. And you know what? Just give me any job right now, any new franchise. Please make me iconic in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. So the John Steed character changes and they start to like, really play up the British gentleman thing, but also like starting to make the show a little sillier. The first season was kind of more grounded in reality. And as they start to evolve the John Steed character, they reveal that the hat has like a bunch of like almost Inspector Gadget kind of like gimmicks inside it.
Oh, really?
The umbrella is a sword. And they start to like kind of slightly, and subtly like factor in sci-fi elements to the show. And then that really picks up in the 4th season when the show hits its stride. And that is where they cast the young up-and-coming actress Diana Rigg to play his new partner, Emma Peel. And this creates a partnership on screen that becomes like what the show is known for today. These two together really take off. They have great chemistry. People love the Emma Peel character, love Diana Rigg. And this is when the show also starts being shown in America. And in fact, ABC wants in on the Avengers business. They like what they've seen, and they throw the BBC like more money to help produce it, which allows its 5th season to go to color. It's been in black and white up until that point.
Right.
And during these years, the show really kind of starts leaning into the sci-fi elements, into more camp. It becomes almost comparable to like the 60s Batman show in terms of its tone and approach. It gets like even meta to where there are scenes where the characters will address the camera and talk right to the audience. And so, yeah, it becomes kind of this like very different show than when it started. But with these two in the lead, it's now a sensation. And it's popular in the UK. It's even popular in the US. This is like the heyday of the Avengers. And this is the moment that, you said, like, why would they even bother with this movie since no one really remembers it? The people who decided to make the movie were probably people who were like young when this was happening.
Totally.
And just never forgot this moment when like the Avengers was a global sensation for at least a couple years.
And this was the first time in the show's history between series 4 and 5 that there was like a will they, won't they between the characters. It was never definitively said in the actual show, but I guess Diana Rigg and Patrick Macnee had kind of been... they had confirmed it later that they had decided that their characters, would casually hook up, but they just didn't make it a big deal. And I think that just shows the strength of their chemistry as well. And also, maybe they were hooking up too. I don't know. I'm not sure who was with who at that time, but Quite possible.
It's actually kind of like a revolutionary idea for the time too, to even
Definitely.
like insinuate romantic like connection between the two of them, because her character is Mrs. Emma Peel, and it is kind of stated in the show that she is married, her husband is just missing, and that's maybe like speaks to some of the reason why she wants to work with this guy. So like the idea of the show is that it's finally revealed after time that he is working for someone. He's working for an organization called the Ministry, kind of just like an MI6 kind of parallel.
Yep.
But she is like an amateur that he just recruits to help, as most of his sidekicks were. Like he would find someone who's like not a secret agent, but they would have skills that can help him. And the whole thing is like he's like a great fighter with his umbrella sword, and he's got his gadgets and everything. And then Emma Peel is like an accomplished martial artist, and so that's how the two of them hook up. But yeah, so like her husband is missing during the entire run of the show, or at least the entire run that she's on. But yeah, they're still saying like, I don't know, maybe these two are hooking up, and I think the audience kind of like liked that idea. So not they probably couldn't state it at the time, but yeah, I think probably a lot of the audience is like, oh yeah, they fucking.
and Diana Rigg, especially at the time, like she was a beauty. Like she's also been just like a really
one of the great beauties.
Yeah, one of the great beauties, and then she just had a long, illustrious career, and modern listeners, if you're not sure of who she is right now, she is Lady Olenna from Game of Thrones.
I'd hate to die like your son, clawing at my neck, foam and bile spilling from my mouth, eyes blood red, skin purple. Must have been horrible for you, as a king's guard, as a father. It was horrible enough for me. A shocking scene. Not at all what I intended. You see, I'd never seen the poison work before. Tell Cersei. I wanted to know it was me.
And there, like, she created a meme, you know what I mean? That's just a great line and a great scene. And she was strong and powerful in that show. And basically she was like that her entire career. So Diana Rigg was one of the greats. So no wonder that series 4 and 5 was created the iconography, really.
Yeah, I mean, and she even had to be strong and powerful off screen as well, because, there are stories about how, while filming her first season, she learned that she was being paid less than some of the cameramen on the show. So yeah, things, some things change and some things don't in the entertainment business. And she had to kind of put her foot down, and really, she was one of the first actresses to kind of like publicly call for pay equality between her and her male co-star, which she says like, kind of made her almost like an outsider on set, unfortunately.
Sure.
She said even Patrick Macnee, who she did have a really good relationship with, and they would remain lifelong friends, but she said even he didn't necessarily support her in that, just because that wasn't the norm at the time, right?
Yep.
He was supposed to be paid a lot more than her, but she put her foot down. She got the pay, but ultimately, after 2 seasons of being the sensation, she knew that her star was really on the rise, and it was time for her to head off. And so they did eventually, in the beginning of the 6th season, they find her husband, and she takes off. Where does she take off to? You're talking about like her iconic Game of Thrones character, but she actually takes off to the role that I always knew Diana Rigg for when I was young, the Bond girl in the great On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Oh, yeah, totally.
The character who Bond ends up marrying. The one Bond girl who could get him to settle down, until the Daniel Craig days, of course. But yeah, so she heads off to do that, and they end up replacing her with an actress named Linda Thorson, who comes on as the new sidekick Tara King. The 6th season, except for a few episodes here and there, largely drops the sci-fi and like camp elements of the Emma Peel years and tries to go back to being a serious show a little bit. But I think even though it sounds like that season definitely has its fans as well, and people ultimately, for the most part, liked Tara King as a character, it just wasn't the same. And like,
Sure.
I think the loss of Diana Rigg really hurt the show, and it ultimately gets canceled after the 6th season.
I think this is such a fascinating show in concept as well, especially when you sidle it up against Doctor Who. And like you said, this show is defined by its eras, right?
Yeah.
And Doctor Who is absolutely defined by who the Doctor is. So It's an interesting way that Sidney Newman has kind of created 2 iconic shows with a very similar through line, but not... I mean, I guess they're both detectives, right? Like I'm not a huge Doctor Who guy. You actually got me to watch one episode recently. I watched the Blink episode, which was great. And
which the Doctor is in for roughly 5 minutes.
Yeah, so the best episode. But it's just an interesting connection.
There's
do it again.
There's definitely like very apparent like similarities between the two, besides being British cult shows, but both have like kind of a very tongue-in-cheek sense of humor. Both have that camp sensibility to them. And yeah, as you said, they both kind of evolve and change over time. I think the Avengers is like even more episodic than Doctor Who. Doctor Who is episodic, but there will be like kind of through lines throughout the seasons. From what I could see, like one of the benefits and one of the strengths of the Avengers as a series was there was almost no like long running storylines. There was like recurring villains here and there, but ultimately you could watch any episode, and as long as you understood the concept, which was explained to you in the opening anyways, you could like jump right in, which is, we don't have enough shows like that anymore.
No,
where
totally.
There's no long running narrative to follow, and people can just kind of dip in and out. I should just note really quickly too, and I only bring this up because there's one quick point I want to make about it. They did, so it was canceled in 69, but they did try to revive it once later in 1976 with a series called The New Avengers.
Right.
Patrick Macnee did come back as John Steed and was given 2 new partners. And the only reason I bring it up is, Chris, I don't know how much you went down this rabbit hole to read about that iteration of the show, but by the time I think that ran 1 or 2 seasons, The New Avengers. It wasn't as popular, definitely had its fans, but near the end, when the writing was on the wall that it was gonna be canceled, a Canadian production company came in and tried to save it and became like the new partners and filtered some money into it. The only thing they asked was that the show now take place in Canada, and the last 4 episodes of the show are actually retitled The New Avengers in Canada. And that's actually like even on the title screen. And that was the final straw. People were like, what? No, I'm not watching this New Avengers in Canada. And that was the end of the franchise until the movie we're talking about.
That is such okay. Listeners, I'm Canadian, if you're new here. And that is something that is super annoying about things that are produced with Canadian money. There's a mandate with the CRTC that you have to include Canada like in the narrative of some kind, or you have to mention it of some kind, which is so interesting because Sidney Newman, who created it, is from Canada, but he was never really credited as being the creator because the when he used to work for the CBC, which is the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, credits like that were not really given out. The way we do things up here is very different than Hollywood does it with showrunners and these guilds and all this other stuff. Canada's a little bit more controlled by the government when it comes to media. So he actually never sought credit on the Avengers because he was like, it was like alien to him to even know to do that. But yeah, anyway, the CRTC is a fucking pain in the ass. Okay. It's really annoying. So there's your sidebar of Canadian history for today.
Great.
On to the film. So the film plans to make this movie go back all the way to 1987. Producer Jerry Weintraub bought the rights to the series. Funnily enough, this guy, we should know his name, Trev. He's the producer of the Karate Kid franchise. So we did the Karate Kid movie from, what was that? When was that? 2012? Is that the same year? 2012?
Yeah, sure, something like that. Yeah.
Okay, all right. There's something. He also, we mentioned Christmas Vacation. He produced Vegas Vacation. Not the best one, but funny. I like that one. He wanted to make this movie, and his company, he hires Sam Hamm, who is one of the writers on Batman 89. He hires Roger Pratt, the cinematographer for Batman 89, really trying to capitalize on that 1989 Batman, pot of gold, really. That's all that was about. So he's trying to recreate it. Unfortunately, Weintraub Entertainment declares bankruptcy. So then Jerry drives to Warner Brothers. So he drives over to Warner Brothers. He takes a producing job. There's rumors flying around that he went to David Fincher to direct this movie. David Fincher says no, he'd rather do Alien 3. Look how that turned out. Then Hamm's script, it completely changes the characters and the personalities, which again, they're going with the Steed and Peele of it all.
Yes.
Warner Brothers
iteration, yeah.
Yes, and Warner Brothers hates that, so they fire him. Then they hired Don McPherson, a fan of the show, to write the new script. They spend 5 months crafting it, and they go to Jeremiah Chechik to direct this movie.
Can I just quickly interject with something I wanted to say about the Sam Hamm story?
Yeah.
Because I think it's so funny that like the way this is like written, right? It says that they hired him. He was hired by Weintraub to work on this. He like outlasts even like the person who hires him, or he's like working on it, and then he just keeps submitting scripts that are like so out of character and terrible that they don't like it. And it says they basically then they just paid him off to get him off the job. Yeah. And I was like, man, this is what is crazy about. I know this is what our show is about, but that like you can just do that. You can just like keep failing on almost like it makes me wonder, did you do that on purpose? So he's just like, I don't really want to do this movie, but they already hired me. I'll just keep making it worse and worse until they have to pay me off to leave.
Yeah.
He got paid to do a shitty job and not have anything he did be used. And God, you got to love it. If you can be that level of successful, man, go for it. I mean, I'm not criticizing the guy. I would do that too.
That's Hollywood, baby. Like, I mean, it is unreal the amount of failing upwards this industry continues to show. Mm-hmm. That's like you said, that's the podcast in a nutshell.
It's interesting also to point out too, just because I it doesn't really go anywhere, but that one of the main looked at like actors during this period was a lot of people were, including I believe Weintraub, were very heavily invested in getting Mel Gibson to play John Steed. Yeah. Which makes sense for the time, I guess. I don't necessarily see him in the role, but if they're only worrying about like at the time like bankability and getting a big star, I get it. But that kind of just feels like we're not really thinking about what the character is in relation to how Patrick Macnee played it. We're looking at a list of bankable leading men and just picking one. That's what that feels like to me. Yeah.
Well, who did they get? First off, Brian Clemens, who was one of the main creatives of the show, really wanted Hugh Grant and Elizabeth Hurley. But I think that was just because they were the so hot right now couple at the time. Yeah. But Jeremiah Chechik,
and then they tried to get Hugh Grant and that hooker that he got the blowjob from.
That's the different Chechik. All right. Jeremiah Chechik and producer Jerry Weintraub, they cast Ralph Fiennes because they see The English Patient and they are just a big admirer, so they want him on the job. Then they go to Nicole Kidman, who is too busy doing Eyes Wide Shut. And then Uma Thurman, her star is on the rise a little bit because of a little movie called Pulp Fiction. I almost forgot it. I almost forgot Pulp Fiction. But yes, so that's who they get for Steed and Peel. Ralph Fiennes.
They go to Uma Thurman and she says, "You know what? I just made another blockbuster about a bad guy who tries to like control weather and change the environment, and that went super well. And I know that's going to be a huge hit, so I should probably just follow it up with another one."
What killed the dinosaurs? The Ice Age.
Yeah, not good. Not a good couple of years for Uma Thurman, which we will get to. Yeah. They actually offer a little role to Diana Rigg at the time. She says no. She reads the script, says absolutely not.
Yes, if you ever like watch interviews or read interviews with Diana Rigg, she was always very outspoken, and she just strikes me as the kind of person who's probably, I bet you her call back to them was probably she probably definitely spoke her mind and just told them, no, this is bullshit.
Yeah, 100%. Michael Caine was also offered a role. It wasn't for him. And they go to one Sean Connery for the villain of the movie. He actually turns it down. He says the role is too small. Give me more meat on the bones here. So they do. And he signs on. And then Eddie Izzard joins the production only because they want to meet Sean Connery.
Correct.
They actually only have one line in the whole movie.
Yeah, they pulled like a Crispin Glover in Charlie's Angels, where it was Izzard's idea. They said, like, you know what? Just take the character, remove all the dialogue. I think I'll be more intimidating as the villain's heavy if I just don't speak. Which is like, I don't know, strange, right? You cast a comedian like Eddie Izzard, who at the time was known for like very verbose, really clever stand-up comedy, these verbal routines, and say, oh, let's just have them not talk in the movie. It seems like a waste to me, but what do I know?
Well, we'll talk about a lot of decisions in this movie, I think. One would be that Warner Brothers, they hired Jeremiah Chechik because of his previous work, and they filmed this movie. And Warner Brothers is completely horrified by the final cut of this movie. They show the first screening to a largely Spanish-speaking working-class audience in Phoenix, Arizona, which was a strange spot, not to hold it in fucking the UK. Anyways, they hated the movie, so Chechik was forced to re-edit this thing down from 115 minutes to 89 minutes. So quite a big chunk is taken out of the movie. Michael Kamen, famed composer. I actually really like Michael Kamen. I really like his X-Men score. Before John Ottman came in to take over, this is our score harm moment, by the way, for listeners new and old. But John Ottman took over the reins for the score for the X-Men franchise in X2 and has that awesome theme. But I actually think that the Michael Kamen score is a little bit underappreciated, if I say so myself. Yeah. So go back and listen to it. But he quits the film because he needs to redo all the work he already did, and there's no time, so he moves on. They replace him with Joel McNeely, who is he's a Jerry Goldsmith protege, I believe. And then Warner Brothers cancels the premiere. They say they don't want any press. They hold it back from critics, which is always a good sign. They push back the release date from June to late summer, August, which is really considered a dumping ground in Hollywood. And
can we say what they said about, because it's one of my favorite bullshit quotes of all time.
Please.
So when Warner Brothers was called out on the fact that they were not doing any press screenings before the movie, which, as you said, is even today that's always like, why is there, there'll be like those embargoes that aren't lifted until like half an hour before the movie comes out, and you're like, And I love that when questioned about this, Warner Brothers said, oh no, it's not because we think it's bad, but because, quote, they wanted the public and press to discover the film together. Which is just the best corporate nonsense BS talk possible.
I love it.
Yeah.
Should we talk about us discovering the film together?
Yes, because I know this was a first-time watch for both of us, correct?
It was, yes.
All right, well, let's see how it went on the other side of this.
Now is the winter of your discontent. The weather is no longer in God's hands, but in mine.
To stop a madman
You will buy your weather from me.
on a mission of destruction.
Hundreds of millions will die. They'll drown, burn.
You need a lady
This way, Dr. Peel.
who's lethal
What did you have in mind? Nothing too messy, I hope.
and a hero
John Steed.
in a hat.
You'll pay for that.
This summer,
You'd like us to work as a team.
You mean I have to trust you?
Absolutely.
Good.
when evil reigns,
Rain or shine, all is mine.
only one team
Insects. Bigger every year.
can weather the storm.
You're not someone who plays by the rules, Doctor.
Rules are made to be broken.
Are you sure you're up for this, dear boy?
Absolutely, old chap.
Let our revels begin.
Ralph Fiennes, Uma Thurman,
Don't wait for me.
and Sean Connery.
Time to die. And this is merely the beginning.
Teeth?
The Avengers.
I'm glad to hear they're together at last.
British Ministry agent John Steed, under direction from Mother, investigates Sir August de Winter's diabolical plot to rule the world with his weather-controlling technology. Steed must now join forces with the beautiful Dr. Emma Peel, a suspect in the sabotage of a government scientific experiment. The posh combo are on the case and must simultaneously clear Peel's name, while also saving the world from an impending ice age.
What killed the dinosaurs, as we had. All right, Chris, why don't you go first on this one?
Okay, before I go with my initial thoughts, I'm going to correct you, Trev, which is actually hilarious. Right before the trailer, Trev says this is his first time watch. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm staring at a review on Letterboxd, a diary entry from 2016.
Yeah.
May I read yours out first, and then I'll go into mine, and then go back to you? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine because it's telling that I had forgotten about this and I was like, oh yeah, first time watch, right?
That's great. Okay, so I won't tell them the star rating you gave, but I'll just read it out. Okay. Mm-hmm. Probably the most incomprehensible theatrically released mainstream movie I have ever seen. That Uma Thurman somehow survived doing this and Batman and Robin in the span of 2 years is pretty amazing. Mm-hmm. So that was Trev's initial thoughts that he forgot. And this movie is the Avengers.
Yeah.
And not the Chechik one that we keep alluding to. This is a
I would watch that movie.
I would watch that. It'd probably be a lot better and have a great climax. But, you know, Trev, theatrical TV reboots, why are they made? And I would say they're meant to deliver something new to an audience while also letting the old fans enjoy something they love in a very cinematic way, in a way that they've never experienced before, because they spent all that time watching the series and they're like, oh man, finally we can see the big screen with big budget and big stars and awesome stuff. That is not what this movie is. This movie is a completely jumbled up episode of TV. It looks like junk. It sounds like junk. There is a 1960s elegance and class that is sorely missing from the movie. The obvious chop job edit on this thing is unreal. Like you say, it's incomprehensible in your review there. I can only agree. You keep waiting for it to make sense. It never does. And is this the worst on-screen couple of all time? These two characters and these two actors together, because they don't get along. They don't seem like they're friends or romantic at all. Like nothing is working here. They seem like they are actors reciting lines instead of characters. If you catch my drift.
Oh, I agree with that 100%. Yeah. Is it my turn to go? To talk about this movie that I've seen twice to my own amazement. I will tell the listeners what I gave it in my original viewing, which I had forgotten about. I see now that when I watched this back in 2016, I gave it half a star, and I think I was in the right there. This is pretty atrocious. This movie represents a lot of just what is wrong with blockbuster cinema at the time and even continuing to today, right? A lot of the things that we just will always criticize and hate about big budget blockbusters is kind of like perfectly encapsulated in this movie. You know, it's funny because my first review, and it's just not surprising to me that I forgot that I'd watched this movie before. And I even remember, because I know I told you recently that I'd seen it before, and I just forgot in the moment. But yeah, when I watched it the first time, obviously I reacted to how incomprehensible it was. But when I watched it back then, all I remember, I think it just came on some streaming service, and I was like, oh yeah, I always remember it. I always meant to get around to this. I heard it was like bad. Maybe it's funny bad. You know, that's what I was hoping for. And then instead just being taken by how incomprehensible it was, but not knowing the whole backstory at the time, not knowing that like 40 minutes had been cut out and it was like this obvious butcher job. So it just seemed like a terrible Hollywood blockbuster, which it is. But at least on this viewing, I was like a little bit more aware of like the behind the scenes nightmare of it as well. And what that probably factors in. So we can talk a little bit about that. But yeah, I think my main takeaway from this movie, and again, so as we get into the review, I'll talk about like my experience with like visiting the show now and kind of trying to see what this movie is trying to accomplish in relation to that. My main takeaway of the movie is it proves that camp is hard.
Yes.
Not everybody can do camp. You know, camp is like one of the toughest kinds of humor to effectively pull off, and some people just don't get it. And when people aim for it and miss the mark, it becomes borderline unwatchable, which is what I would call this, you know, because this is a movie that desperately needs its tongue planted either more firmly in its cheek or less. I don't really know.
It should be bursting out the fucking side of their cheeks in a movie like this.
Yeah, I don't like whatever it's I can't say it's trying to be too serious because it's not, but it's like finding just the wrong tone to pitch everything at. And what you said about the actors just sounding like they're reading lines, that was what I was bumping up against the most, I think, watching this movie. Because this movie is predicated on they want you to really buy into the relationship of Pete and Steele and really fall for these two characters and love their partnership and their chemistry. And the problem is they never sound like they're having an actual human conversation. Yeah. Every line of dialogue they both deliver is just innuendo and like clever puns. but like ones that they never naturally feed off of each other. Someone will make a pun and someone will respond with an innuendo, and it never sounds like they've actually listened to what the person before them said. It's just this like constant game of one-upmanship of trying to be like the more clever of the two. And you never buy into it. It never makes you like ship the two. So by the point you get to like the movie starting to like insinuate a romantic interest, you're like, what? Why? Why would these two like each other? Why would Peele trust this woman who has been brought to him as a possible suspect in this case? Why would he take her on as a sidekick? Why would he keep trusting her as an evil clone of her attacks him and shoots him in the chest? And that's the last thing I'll say about it, because I know we're going to get into more specifics, but the movie also just makes a huge fatal flaw of, as you said, this is a movie that's meant to introduce the Avengers concept to a large segment of its audience. You obviously can't hope that your audience will just be the cult following who is still alive in 98, you know? So you can't have your first movie have an evil Emma Peel clone as a major plot development. That's something you can only do in a later movie or a later season of a TV show when we already know and love Emma, and would be like baffled by, why is Emma evil? Like, that's so weird. Oh, it's a clone. Oh, I get it. But when this is our first time seeing her, you're just confusing us. And like, I don't care that there's an evil clone of her because I don't really know who the real Emma is yet. So that's just that's just screenwriting 101 mistake, one of many in the movie, but like a critical flaw that also really kills it dead on arrival.
I got so many thoughts. I'm going to travel a little bit back, and then I'll come back to that clone thing, okay? The first thing is the banter between these two characters. Not only are they trying to one-up each other, but they're doing it, like, really poorly. Like, they're not clever enough. It's boring. It's flat. It's not sexy enough. There's a moment where, spoilers, they eventually do kiss nearing the end of the film. I'm just getting that out of the way. And when they kiss, it's to prove that she's not the clone or whatever she is, because let's get back to that right after I'm done talking about this. But he kisses her, and she's like, "Oh, is that were you testing something?" And she goes, "Yeah, I'm testing if it's you or not." And then she goes, and he says, "Well, I'm still thinking about it." Why not say something like, it's going to take a little bit more investigation, or one up itself, or be a little bit more horny about it? You know what I mean? But instead of just like, he kind of just falls back and goes, "Yeah, I don't know, maybe." Like that's the equivalent, which isn't fun. That's not fun banter. And then, the clone double, maybe it's her, maybe it's not. Does she have amnesia? Is it a robot? Is it a fembot baby? Like, it never actually tells you. It plants seeds of maybe it could be all of those things, but it never confirms it. So again, the hack job that is this movie is outrageous. It becomes, as you said, unwatchable. I right off the bat, I'm telling you right now, this thing sucks. Like,
it's weird. It's weird too, because let's say you are a fan of the original property too, and I was just watching it this time, thinking about how like it throughout the like majority of the running time of this movie, it's the evil clone Emma that's wearing the iconic like leather jumpsuit, catsuit that like the Diana Rigg version of Emma Peel is known for. So it's like, okay, so you're taking the iconic costume that we know and love if we're fans, and you're putting it on the evil version. And then when like the good Emma defeats her, I guess she goes like, you know what? I like that costume that my evil clone wore. I'm just going to start wearing it. And you're like, what? Why? Why would you do that?
There's very few 85, 89-minute movies that are this boring and leave you with a complete sense of nothing. Yeah. Like, this is one of the shorter films we've looked at in all the years we've been doing this podcast, and I had checked my phone numerous times, wondering when this thing was going to be over. And then when it ended, it was like one of those like just nothing burger emotions. You know what I mean? Like, even right now, I feel I'm getting hopped up, but it's kind of, I think it's just more fun. But when it was over, I just went about my day. You know what I mean? It's one of those movies that you finish it and you go about your day, never to think about it again. And unfortunately, I have to record this with you, so that's why I'm thinking about it. But nothing works. Well, okay, I'll say, okay, you know what? I'll say two things that work. I liked The beginning when Steed is walking down the street and just beating guys up. That's pretty fun. It's it's got that cheeky secret agent training stuff going on.
I was kind of disappointed to find out it was a training sequence. I think it would have been even better if that was like really like, an evil town, But
I just wanted him to punch a nun. I really wanted that. That would have put it over the moon. But I really like that, and I did think Uma Thurman was pretty sexy in the movie. She's given
There's
a Black Widow vibe.
No denying that. Yeah.
But other than that, Trev, nothing.
Yeah.
It's not even fun watching Sean Connery, an ex-Bond actor, play a villain that is kind of a Bond parody spy thing. That's not even fun to me because he's awful in it too.
Sean Connery, noted Bond actor and noted good person in real life.
You did an interview in which you said, it's not the worst thing to slap a woman now and then. As I remember, you said you don't do it with a clenched fist. It's better to do it with an open hand. Yeah, remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I didn't love that.
I haven't changed my opinion.
You haven't?
No, not at all.
You think it's good to slap a woman?
No, I don't think it's good.
You don't think it's bad?
I don't think it's that bad. I think that it depends entirely on the circumstances and if it merits it. Yeah.
What would merit it?
Well, if you have tried everything else, and women are pretty good at this, they can't leave it alone. They don't want to have the last word, and you give them the last word, but they're not happy with the last word. They want to say it again and get into a really provocative situation. Then I think it's absolutely right.
Nice.
He's terrible in this, actually. Like, to the point where you wonder, did he just know it was bad and just decide to phone it in and just didn't care? I know I read that the reason he took this is he thought it would be interesting to play like an over-the-top villain, but he's not going over the top enough. I mean, there's one kind of amazing moment that maybe gave birth to the furry movement in the world, where
the hard cut?
Yeah, the hard cut to him holding a meeting with his fellow villains, and they're all in gigantic, colorful bear suits, like teddy bear costumes. Which is like that's a good laugh, but like the laugh doesn't last because you're just kind of like more baffled by it,
Well, especially when one of them talks back to him and he throws darts at them, killing them. Yeah. So am I to believe that he's so strong that he threw these little tiny darts so fast and furious that they went through the bear costumes and then pierced the people to kill them?
Those need to be like lawn darts. Like,
I know.
Yeah.
Well, because before they show the reveal that they're people wearing, bear costumes, I was like, are these just giant bears? Like, are these the Care Bear cult? Like, what's going on here? But totally out of place, totally stupid.
And that sequence points to what I mean about like the problem this movie has with camp, right? Because I think what you keep encountering in this movie is. And again, I don't like. Who knows if there was like any better examples in the longer cut? We'll talk about that in a moment. Whether we think this is actually a movie that could be salvaged by a longer cut, because I have thoughts about that. Spoiler alert: my thought is no. But it's that teddy bear scene. Like they think camp is just to like present something that's funny in concept, and then that's the joke. Right? Just like leave it alone there. Oh, isn't it funny that the bad guys are meeting in teddy bear suits? Yeah, for roughly like half a second it's funny. But now you need to actually put jokes in. You need to like push the humor. And I think this movie thinks if it just like comes up with funny scenarios and funny ideas, that will do all the work. Like I know these characters come from the show, and in particular what I learned is they actually come from the 6th season after Emma Peel had left the show. But let's talk about the characters.
Smart.
They're just trying to combine the best, most beloved elements, right? But the characters of mother and father, let's talk about
right.
that,
Okay,
right?
okay. Yeah.
The leaders of the ministry, right? So played by great actors too. Like the great Jim Broadbent plays mother, and Fiona Shaw, who I love, plays father. Get it? Isn't that funny? See, the man plays mother and the woman plays father. And that's what I mean. Like the movie is just like, that's funny, right? Like, and they don't feel like they think that that's just going to amuse us enough through like the runtime.
It's ironic that Eddie Izzard went on to play mother in real life. I'm keeping that in.
Okay. Your funeral.
Yeah. Our 3 listeners, they just start picketing.
But yeah, I like those performers, but like it's not enough to just be like, isn't it interesting that he's mother and she's father? Like, do something more with that, you know, push it further. And the movie just keeps doing that. The movie keeps going like, isn't that a weird visual? Isn't that a strange like place for them to be? Isn't that setting interesting? And then not writing anything to justify it. And that's like what kept driving me insane. And like you said, like, yeah, it's only 89 minutes, but it feels longer. It feels boring because you're just like holding on for dear life, waiting for the story to start to make sense, waiting for these characters to actually become interesting. And it's never happening. And punctuated by, we should say too, it's an action movie with just nothing but terrible action.
There's a scene in here that, again, I think what you're getting at is the movie is very tell, don't show, maybe, because you're just kind of there to assume that these relationships are occurring, to assume what this ministry is, assuming what the villain is. There's two timestamps I want to throw to you, okay? One is at 38 minutes, and Peel and Steed are going through the case or whatever, and Peel has like a eureka moment and goes, "Oh, I think I found something," and then Steed goes, "You never fail to surprise me." Now, Trev, at that point, you've been watching the movie for almost 40 minutes, and that line sticks out like a sore thumb to the viewer because these two barely know each other. They have just met. Peel hasn't even done anything yet. There's just nothing there. There's no history. There's no chemistry. But the movie has told you that this is based on an old TV show, that you should just accept that these two know each other. And you should be coming in with the baggage, which I hate. The second timestamp, 1 hour in to an 89-minute movie, we finally know what Sean Connery is doing as the villain. It takes an hour for him to flat out tell everybody that he's Mr. Freeze, you know, and he's controlling the weather for profit, like a Lex Luthor thing, you know, real estate, you know, like it's maddening because for 66% of the movie, I'm like, I don't know what this villain is doing. I don't know any stakes. Oh, speaking of stakes, oh my God. Sorry, Trev. I if you got something to go, but cut me off and make me shut up. But there is not a single shot of the public in this movie that takes place in London. London.
I have a note, Chris, that says this feels like a COVID movie.
Yes.
I know it's not, but it has that vibe of where there's just never any extras. You know, there's only like 10 people in this movie, and there's nobody else ever in the background during the, like, as you're insinuating, the climax is heavily predicated on, you know, scenes of mass destruction in London, right? Oh my God, tornadoes and ice age, and we never see citizens running for their lives or dying or hiding.
News broadcasts. Nothing. Yes. Nothing of what's going on. The threat has no stakes at all. I have never seen a movie on this scale with this amount of money for that time period, or honestly any movie at all, that does not show the public. Like, even in movies like Jurassic Park, that they go to a goddamn island, they spend it in, you know, off the coast of Costa Rica with the public at one point. Like, give me a break. It's so stupid.
I thought it was very funny that when Sean Connery's character finally does reveal his evil plan, which, as you said, is he has this like weather machine that can control the weather around the globe, and he decides to blackmail the entire world to say, like, you have to pay me to you know, control the weather. And then when you hear his demands, he asks for 10% of each country's like national gross, and I was like, you know what, pretty good deal actually.
Yeah.
Like, if someone had the ability to always give the countries the weather they need, like the proper weather, I don't know, 10% of your like national GDP isn't that bad. That almost is like the real version of like the $1 million joke in Austin Powers. It's like, come on, Connor, you can aim a little higher than that, right? Like, I would maybe take that deal if I was the government.
I know he doesn't even have a controlling stake in the corporate weather company he's creating here.
Can I give you one? I don't have a timestamp for this, but there was a moment to me that just like totally summed up the poor like filmmaking on display as well, and the obvious like inability to deliver scenes in a way that would be like entertaining or like you know, make us go, oh, what's this? And that is the reveal of a spoiler alert for the Avengers. Sorry, folks, but the reveal that Father Fiona Shaw's character, the deputy director of the ministry, is a traitor. Now, in a movie made by competent people, what you would do is you would cut to a scene of Sean Connery's villain playing golf and like talking to someone, and we don't know who that someone is, and the camera would then pan over and like pan up and slowly reveal, oh my God, it's Father. Father is a traitor. Whoa, what a twist. This just like hard cuts to Father and Connery together playing golf. Like, and it's like, what? And it's such a hard cut and so sudden that it took me a moment to even realize, oh, I guess Father's bad then, huh? Like, it didn't even like occur to me because the movie didn't give me the proper filmic visual like language to tell me, oh, okay, this is a betrayal. So it took me like a couple additional beats to even realize what I was seeing, and that's just a failure of like directing, editing, everything. And there's multiple moments like that in this movie, a lot of head scratchers, but that was one that really stood out to me.
Or the Marble Mansion Paradox Maze thing,
which is kind of cool visually for like a moment, but then culminates in like a really bad, like, so what you're talking about is there's a moment where Mrs. Peel is like knocked unconscious. She's drugged in Connery's mansion, and when she awakens, she tries to escape and finds herself in this like MC Escher-esque like hallway or this like eternal staircase. That's actually kind of a cool shot when it's an above shot, and she goes around the same staircase over and over and over again. It was kind of neat trying to kind of think of how they might have done that. And then she keeps going into the same room over and over, no matter which way she leaves it. And it's like, okay, the movie is like threatening to be interesting for like 10 seconds there, but then they cut to like Peel on the outside of the building, who for no reason, they cut to Steed on the outside of the building, who for no reason just like starts like tapping a window out there. Like, he's like, I wonder what's behind this window. And somehow she like hears that where she is and just like runs at the wall and jumps through it and jumps through the window. It's like, oh, actually it was very easy to get out of this the entire time. And she just had to take this like blind faith leap through the wall for no reason. And then, this actually leads to like another like, boy, these people sure don't know what a movie is. Because when she jumps through that window, we then cut to a camera perspective, like looking through the shattered window, seeing him like bending over the now unconscious body of Emma Peel. And it is filmed in a way that in 99% of movies, you would go, oh, I'm seeing the perspective of a villain right now. They're in trouble because someone is looking at them and they've been caught. Like, she tried to escape, but we're seeing that a villain sees them. Nope. We just cut back to Steed's apartment and he's actually taking her home. It's like, oh, wait, what was with that perspective shot? Like, oh.
And again, is it magic now? Is that mansion magic? Like, what's going on? Like, we're rooted in science, apparently, with the scientific climate change machine. But the mansion is magic. There's an invisible man at a certain point. What is that? I mean, I can only assume that that's a character that shows up in the show at some point. Did you look into that?
I did, nothing. I ran through some information on the show. As I said, I watched an episode. I'm getting to that soon. I never saw anything about an invisible agent. I will say that, as you probably saw, that invisible agent in this movie is a voice cameo from Patrick Macnee, who played the original John Steed. Even though I think after the fact, he kind of just discussed how I wasn't that impressed with the movie. But unlike Dinah Rigg, he was willing to take the paycheck. I thought what was very funny about that is like when you finally meet that character, Invisible Jones, he's called, the Ministry agent. He actually talks about how he was like a master of camouflage, but he got like too good at it and it made him invisible. And he's like, and ever since they stuck me down here in the basement, he's like doing clerical work now. And all I could think was, wait a minute, he's invisible. You just became the most valuable secret agent of all time.
I know.
Like, why would they give you a desk job? That makes no sense. And the movie, again, you could maybe make that into a joke, but the movie doesn't even have like the smarts to do that. So instead, you're just like, what? Like, why? He should be on every mission. He's invisible.
And also, he's wearing glasses, so you can see him floating around because the glasses are floating. So the whole time I'm like, is he naked? And then he does he goes across this projector, so you see the outline of him, and he's wearing clothes, like he's wearing a suit. So then I'm thinking, okay, what part of him is invisible? Is it his whole body? Does he have to take his clothes off? Are his clothes now invisible all the time? Many questions, no answers, unlike 99% of the movie.
It's weird because you said the thing about, like, is it magic now? And you talk about, like, the presence of Invisible Agent. And I discussed when I was talking about the history of the show about how the show started with, like, this kind of, like, grounded realism. And over time started, like, feeding in more and more sci-fi and eventually got to a point where it almost felt like a completely different show than it was at the beginning, with, like, more camp and more sci-fi elements. And there was, like, evil robots. And I think they, encountered aliens at certain points. And, like, different, like, monsters and things like that, and supernatural elements. But there's a big difference between pulling that off over the course of like a multi-season show, where you kind of perk up a little bit as you're watching like the seasons and going, oh wow, the show's like evolving before my very eyes. It's becoming something else. Oh, isn't that interesting? And in cramming it all into 89 minutes and starting the movie and going, okay, this is just a spy movie. And then like an hour later being like, by the way, there's also an invisible man. Like that's a little too much to accept in that short of a runtime. Either the whole movie needs to show those kind of supernatural elements from the beginning, or you just leave them out and you just go with like the more subtle sci-fi elements. So that's like, again, like that character in particular really sticks out like a sore thumb here, even though it's not a thumb you can see.
Nice. Okay, I want you to talk about the show, and I want to ask you a question. In the episode that you watched, were there giant robot bees that attacked the car?
Unfortunately not. So yes, I decided, as I did like a lot of reading about the show actually, because I actually got kind of, as I looked at the backstory of it, I got kind of interested in that whole idea about how the show changed over time. I found that to be actually fascinating. You know, I'd never read about a show that seemed to kind of reinvent itself that often and that like significantly over time. And I did feel like, okay, you know what? I'll do myself a favor, I guess, and like I'll watch an episode. But I didn't actually get around to it until after watching the movie again. And I'll just tell you the story because so as is often the case with these, I watched this with my fiance. She hated it as well. She, even said like at some point, I think we were like 20 or 30 minutes into the movie, and I said something like, you know what the problem is with this movie? The problem is like their dialogue doesn't naturally bounce off each other. Nothing is really happening. And Liz was just like, the problem is it's really boring. It's like, no, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But then, so afterwards I was like, well, okay, that was based on a show. And we just went on YouTube and watched like a trailer for the show that was made for like a DVD release. And we're watching the trailer and we both go, you know what? Actually, I think we'd probably like the show more, right? Like this looks a little better. And so we ultimately, there weren't that many episodes available like on YouTube. It's not really streaming like anywhere, but there's a few episodes uploaded to YouTube. So we watched one called Murdersville, which is a story about Emma Peel driving a friend of hers to the small like British village she has just bought a house in, and she's taking him there. And what is discovered is that this town is populated entirely by assassins. At some point, assassins took the town over, and they have a deal with the townspeople now to where if you want to have someone killed, you can arrange for that person to be in the town at a certain time, and you can murder them there, and the townspeople won't do anything about it. They'll just watch, and they'll help you cover up the murder. And Emma Peel finds out about this, and because she finds out, they decide to capture her, and they're planning to murder her. But first they say, well, we have to make sure no one knows you're here. Who knows you're here? And they torture her until eventually she reveals, and she lies and says, well, my husband knows I'm here. And they're like, well, you have to call your husband. And they like hold a gun to her. And they do that like thing you see in a lot of movies like this or shows like this where she calls Steed and she's talking to him, but she's basically talking to him in code. Like on the other side of the phone, he's like, so are you in trouble right now? And she's like, yes, that's right, dear. Anyways, I'll be back later. And he ultimately puts together she's stuck in this town and he arrives to save her. All right. So my reaction to the episode was, it was roughly 1,000,000 times better than this movie. Like the chemistry between Steed and Peel, even though in the episode I watched they were apart for a lot of it, but when they are together, they just have the chemistry that Thurman and Fiennes are so sorely lacking. And yeah, the show's camp cheeky sense of humor was just so much more in my wheelhouse. It really was reminiscent to me of like the 60s Batman. And that's just the vibe I got from watching the trailer. And so it actually, here's the shocking surprise reveal of this episode, Chris. I kind of hated revisiting this movie again, but like what came out of it is because I was like kind of frustrated after watching that episode that there was like no more to watch. Earlier today, I ordered the DVD set called The Complete Emma Peel Mega Set, which is just every Emma Peel episode. Because that one episode and just the trailer alone was enough to make me go, you know what? I can tell I like this show. This show has what the movie's missing. The camp is actually effective. The characters are fun. The performances are great. And I just, it's that same... It has that cheesy, 60s kind of cheap TV feel to it. Every time they drive, it's like rear projection, which is always funny. The action. I mean, how serious does the episode I just talked to you sound? Like in concept, right? Oh, a town full of like assassins. It ends with them like defeating the assassins with like a pie fight. So it's like, it's a very, it looks like just a very silly show. And so I found that they've released like full season sets, but those are all out of print. But I was able to find like the set that just has her episodes. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to pull the trigger. So if nothing else, I'm glad that this at least helped me find another show I'm probably going to enjoy.
Sure.
But that doesn't save the movie. In fact, it's exactly what you'd expect. Watching the episode made me kind of hate the movie even more because it's like, wow, they really did miss the mark.
Well, that episode ends in a pie fight, and this one ends with a stabbing and a lightning bolt from the clouds electrocute Sean Connery and lift him up into the air. Never to be seen again.
I was wondering, did they think that like when lightning comes down, it then goes back up, like it retracts? Because that's what it does here, carrying Sean Connery with it. Chris, don't sell this moment short. There's so much more going on. So he is stabbed through the chest by like, is it the umbrella or is it just like a part of the it's like a pole or something?
I think it's like a pole, yeah.
Yeah. He's stabbed through the chest and then electrocuted. Him and Steed at the time are standing on a metal like walkway, but for some reason the electricity does not conduct to Steed. I don't know. Steed just wearing rubber shoes. And don't forget that before that, you might be wondering, what about the other villains? What about the traitorous father and the Emma Peel clone? Well, don't worry, because we didn't even mention Father is blind, but for some reason, despite that, they were like, you know what, Father, even though you're blind, how about you fly and pilot the getaway hot air balloon? And I had to laugh. And again, this is like an ironic laugh, so I'm not going to give the movie credit. This like comes down to a sequence where the good Emma is fighting the evil Emma on the hot air balloon, and ultimately the good Emma jumps off, and then the blind father just like pilots the hot air balloon into a sign and they explode and die. And I was like, oh, they didn't have to do anything. The bad guys were stupid enough to let the blind person fly the getaway car, and it just went right into a sign and blew up.
The movie did nothing for the ableism movement. It really did not.
Definitely.
No. Yeah, the follow-up from this movie is just something else. Like, you're right. How did Uma Thurman, how did she recover? And I guess it's because Tarantino revived her career with Kill Bill, but...
Yeah, it took a bit, actually. But maybe it was like the Kill Bill thing, and maybe it was just like, well, Batman and Robin and the Avengers were really bad, but she was really hot in both of them.
Totally, yeah. But her career was put on ice, pun unintended there, but it does work. Then Sean Connery retires very soon after.
He has such a miserable experience on this and League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which we'll get to, that he's just like, no, I'm done with this.
Yeah. And then, as I said before, the director just makes TV for 15 years after, and I think continues to. I'm not really sure, but this really was a black eye. And Trev said in the beginning of the episode, so much so that Marvel's Avengers had to change their name. It had to change the title. It had to wait for the stink of this movie to go away or at least be forgotten. Hell, Trev forgot this movie in only 6 years from watching it. Yeah. So that's really the timetable.
Well, and we didn't talk about what it does to Ralph Fiennes, but I would say it's even notable that I think it definitely puts a damper on his career for a while too. Because you think about, he does Schindler's List in '93, and it's a supporting role, but he's so powerful in that he right after Schindler's List, which is only his third movie, I believe, is only his third credited role. But he gets lead roles in Quiz Show and Strange Days and The English Patient just because he was so good in Schindler's List. And then The Avengers is the first attempt to say okay, well, now what happens if we put him in a big Hollywood blockbuster? And then after that, he just kind of goes back to supporting roles and in smaller movies for a long time until he gets the Voldemort breakthrough again. So I have a question about that though. So this is a crucial question because we've been talking about how terrible the movie is. We've been talking about all the bad filmmaking decisions, the script problems, the obvious edit hatchet job. But I do want to ask you, just on a base level, do you think Fiennes and Thurman, putting aside the chemistry between the two individually, do you think they're bad in this?
I think Uma Thurman's bad in this. Yeah. I think
her accent's definitely bad. Yeah, it's tough because her accent's bad, but I think, and it's maybe I'm just being distracted by how great she looks in the suit and how she has the walk down. She's not as fun in this as she is as Poison Ivy, which I wish she was.
Well, that's it goes back to your camp thing, right? Batman and Robin was terrible and continues to be, but also we do talk. There's a little bit of I don't want to say coming around on that movie.
No, Batman and Robin's a fun movie to watch. That's the difference.
Yes. There's a so bad it's good feel to that movie. There's a high level of camp in Joel Schumacher's way of filming it, the colors, the vibrancy, and again, Uma Thurman is so fucking wild in that movie, and it's very theatrical. That's what I'd say. And I think in this film, Uma Thurman it can't really do an English accent, and it's so obvious, especially when she's talking to Ralph Fiennes. So that's frustrating.
It does make you wonder why they didn't just get a British actress, right? And especially when you realize
she's so hot right now. That's why
they were interested in Elizabeth Hurley, who would have been way better. And I was also thinking
Nicole Kidman.
Nicole Kidman probably would have been better. You know who else I was thinking would be like a really good Emma Peel, and maybe she wouldn't have been right at the time, but Kate Beckinsale I think could clearly pull it off as well.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. A little too early in the career jumpstart there.
But I think the problem with Thurman in this is that she's only trying to be sexy. Like she's not trying to with. It's interesting because in Poison Ivy, she's purposely going more theatrical and over the top, and here she's just trying to be just a sex pot. And it's well, no, you need that additional twinkle in your eye, which you had in the previous movie you made, but here for some reason you're underplaying it.
Well, I think also Joel Schumacher's not a good director, but. He's got a vision, I guess.
I think Joel Schumacher is a good director, actually. He's made a lot of great movies. I think he, that's
well, maybe not good. Yeah, that's a different discussion. But maybe good, not good for the subject matter being Batman.
Yeah, I think there was other things going on there.
Sure.
I think he made a version of the movie he set out to make. Whether it was the right version is the question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Totally. Okay.
But I will say I do think Ralph Fiennes is actually. No pun intended, fine in this.
Yeah.
I think he's actually maybe the right guy for this role, even at the time and beyond. I do think he pulls off that posh British gentleman, secret agent thing well. I think the problem is he's not given a co-star who can play off of him at the time, and he's given a terrible script. But I would say out of anybody, he's probably the one who walks away from this a little untarred in my eye. I'm well, actually, he was pretty good.
Also, what's frustrating about it is if they were to go on and make sequels, let's say this did well enough to get at least one more movie. The beauty of the era of the show with Patrick Macnee and Diana Rigg was the will they, won't they thing.
Yeah.
Right? That's what fans loved so much about them. It created a wittiness and a banter that was never before seen on that show. If you're going forward with a sequel, knowing that they're quote unquote together, sort of, maybe, and they have kissed, so they have, they've consummated in some way, shape, or form, that magic or that banter is gone. Where do you go from there? Because I see in the notes that the fans were really mad that they cemented that they get together.
Yeah, it's a gigantic miscalculation because when you don't verbalize it, when you don't make it canon, what you do is you allow the people who ship the two of them to always have that, right? Mm-hmm. To be oh, it's so fun. Look how they're flirting. And those people can always say, I bet you these characters are hooking up off screen.
Totally.
But then the side of the audience who says, well, no, she's married, I don't want them together, can just accept them and say, oh, they do flirt, but at the end of the day, they're just friends. They're partners. And so both parts of the fan base get the way they want it. And in this, you say no, they hook up, and it's okay. Well, now, first of all, again, we've known them for a shorter time, so the idea that she is hooking up and cheating on her husband, who she talks about in this movie, makes her, makes the character a little less likable, and you haven't established the rapport between them enough for us to accept them as maybe just these two friends who flirt a little bit. Mm-hmm. So yeah, gigantic miscalculation to actually end with them kissing and insinuate they are together. That they should have. There's bigger problems in this movie, but that's just added to the pile.
Yeah, man. If it's not obvious, listeners, this was a turd, and
this was a rough one.
And it deserves the place in history it has as being a turd. Again, a lot of studio interference, the wrong guy for the job, the wrong cast at some points, editing this to an inch of its life. A tale as old as time on this podcast, and sometimes it's funny that we repeat these stories so much that you're almost it's shocking that things do succeed in this industry. Mm-hmm. But this one is one that is firmly planted in the history books as being just a piece of shit. And after I edit this thing, done.
Yeah, you're gonna forget you saw it. You're well, you know what's gonna happen is we're gonna end up doing this movie again 4 years from now because we'll forget that we did it.
Oh, that'd be
no,
great.
it's only 89 minutes, and you'd think this is probably what I thought the first fucking time I watched it when I came across it on streaming service. Oh, it's only 90 minutes. I'll do, whatever. But the thing is, it's a long 90 minutes.
Yeah,
it's a slog, and like we haven't even talked about the larger issue of it. Is like now that I've watched an episode of the show, got kind of into it, fell down that rabbit hole a little bit, ordered the DVD. It makes me even like not just mad, also that the show is like such a clearly bad adaptation of it, and that I can tell that even from my fandom of the show lasting roughly 24 hours at this point, right?
Yeah.
But like this is the kind of failure that you wonder, did this like ultimately hurt the legacy of the show even, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think you talked about how like you made some jokes at the beginning about how it's just not a show that's remembered. I mean, a movie like this will actually really hurt a property, and maybe the show would be more remembered. Maybe it would be like more available on streaming services if there was also a successful movie franchise, or at least not a movie that was such a stinker it became kind of infamous. I will say, Chris, I don't know if you noticed, there is a new reboot of the TV show in the works. Studio Canal announced last year that they are rebooting the Avengers with the writers Mickey Down and Conrad Kay, who I guess have done a show called Industry, which I am not very aware of, but apparently is kind of acclaimed, an HBO BBC series.
Okay.
And yeah, they've been hired. The director of that Sex Education show on Netflix is a co-producer and is going to direct it. It hasn't found a home yet, but it looks like it might be. It could be happening. I'm
but
down.
as a show.
As a show, right? Which is probably the proper way to do it, again, because I do think, like, just from what I saw, there's more fun to be had in letting them have like a bunch of adventures every week, and again keeping it just fully episodic and just doing whatever the hell you want. That's what I think ultimately I find intriguing about the presentation of the show, saying, yeah, it can either be like a real like down and dirty murder mystery, or they can fight the Loch Ness monster. Who cares?
Yeah.
We'll do whatever we want. So I'm glad it's coming back as a show if it does, because God knows I would never want to see another one of whatever the hell this was.
Isn't it interesting? And I'm sure this theme months of summer sweeps is really going to nail this to the wall, but it is inherently very difficult to make a TV show into a movie. And especially back then, with like the movies we're going to look at and the TV shows that they were inspired by, they're inherently episodic, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to cram so many things into maybe a 2-hour movie, and it's just really, really hard. I mean, we kind of did a TV show. Oh no, we did a TV show theme last year or 2 years ago. Who knows at this point? The ABCs of TV. We did the A-Team, Baywatch, and Charlie's Angels, and all three are just very hard to do.
Yeah.
So it's
and of course there's also Lost in Space, which we also both agreed was really bad.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Go.
Anyways, continue.
But I think it is just hard to reduce years. In this case, 161 episodes spanning over 8 years of history.
Yeah.
Dial it down to 90 minutes.
And as you said, too, different eras, right? Like even like I talked about, like there's two characters in this that were never even a part of the Peel and Steed years,
Totally.
So you're merging all this stuff. What you're then basically saying is like, if it's an episodic show, well, our movie is going to be like the best episode, right?
Yeah.
And it's putting a pressure on it that the show never had, because when you're making 20 or so episodes a season and it's just purely episodic and it's like already a campy, goofy show, there's no pressure to like make an amazing movie quality thing every week. So, totally. They were tossing whatever at the wall, and that's kind of the fun of it. And those limitations are actually better. I think that's the problem too, is when you don't have the budget limitations, when you have all the resources in the world, when you have these big stars, the pressure is like bigger, and you probably overthink yourself. In this case, it seems like they underthought a lot of it. Mm-hmm. But it's just like, yeah, you're right that you're cramming too much in to try and make the biggest spectacle, when really what people probably liked about the show is that it wasn't that. It was just this like little fun campy thing, and it didn't need to have Sean Connery as the bad guy controlling robotic bees and unleashing tornadoes onto a strangely empty London, No, just give me Pete and Steele driving with rear projection, fighting a couple assassins in a small town. Like, that's what I want to see.
Totally.
I guess I would ask then finally to finally summarize this. So I hinted at this earlier. If, let's say tomorrow, our podcast backfires and suddenly we accidentally trigger a release the Checha cut movement, but we know Warner Brothers is down for this. We know that if pressured enough, they will cave and release the alternate cut. If Chechik's original longer cut was made available, would you watch it?
No, I'm interrupting you. If to see the extra 25 minutes or whatever, I'd still have to watch the 90.
It's funny because I always, we've had this discussion before where whenever you hear a story like this, my inclination is always to be like, oh, the director, the filmmaker got screwed over because the studios are always like the bad guys, right? And you're like, yeah, you feel like you're always interested to see the original vision. And with this one with you, I'm like, no, I don't care. Because what's on screen here just does not look like something that could be salvaged by more of it.
No. Just more agony. More, I would look at my watch 25 minutes more. You know what I mean? Like it just, no. You say no, but I know you. You'd probably throw it on.
Well,
you're completionist bastard.
If I did, it would only be because A, you do get to see Uma Thurman in those costumes again.
Sure.
And B, by that point, I would have forgotten that I've watched it twice. So
I'll remind you when we record this episode again in 6 years.
Remember how you're like always making jokes about me being old? I'm like, and when we're even in this episode, we're like, oh my God, how long are we going to run that? And then like 2 seconds later, it's like, I forgot I watched this movie 6 years ago. I'm really not helping the jokes here much.
That's great. Okay. Anyway, that's it for the Avengers 1998. Moving
piece
on.
Of shit.
Yeah, piece of shit. Like I said, the Ass Avengers. Moving on with Summer Sweeps, the next episode we're looking at will be doing The Mod Squad from 1999, then Miami Vice from 2006, Get Smart from 2008, which has The Rock in it, by the way. I just remembered.
I know. Yep.
We've talked a lot about The Rock. Let's try to keep The Rock talk to a minimum in Get Smart. If people really want to listen to about The Rock and how we feel about the guy, check out that Baywatch episode and definitely check out Black Adam. Mm-hmm. That was a great conversation. Then we cap off Summer Sweeps with Land of the Lost in 2009. So yeah, there you go. Follow along at F2FPod. That's at F2, the number 2 FPod on all the socials. Like us there, like us everywhere. Rate, review, whatever you do. A star rating would be great. And just join the tribe and hit that subscribe. And come away with us along this TV landscape in the cinema.
Jarvis.
Welcome home, son.
I am Iron Man. You think you're the only superhero in the world? Mr. Stark, you've become part of a bigger universe. You just don't know it yet. Who the hell are you? Nick Fury, director of S.H.I.E.L.D. Oh. I'm here to talk to you about the Avenger Initiative.